The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as the heavy doors burst open. Ambassador Sarah Chen strode through the ornate hallway, her boots echoing against the crystalline floor that had witnessed 1,000 diplomatic meetings. Behind her walked Captain Marcus Torres, his military uniform stark against the flowing robes of alien dignitaries who scrambled to clear a path. The humans had requested this emergency session after 3 months of failed negotiations. The Zephyrian Empire, led by the ruthless Admiral Kethvar, had been systematically destroying human colonies along the outer rim. Each attack grew bolder, each massacre more brutal. The Galactic Council had offered nothing but empty words and bureaucratic delays. Admiral Kethvar dominated the center of the chamber, his 8-foot frame covered in ceremonial armor that gleamed with the blood-red insignia of conquest. His species, the Zephyrians, had built their empire through calculated brutality and psychological warfare. They believed fear was the greatest weapon in the universe, and for centuries, they had been proven right. The alien admiral's 4 eyes tracked Sarah's movement as she approached the central speaking platform. His translator device hummed to life, converting his guttural speech into the common galactic tongue. "The human delegation arrives late to beg for mercy they do not deserve," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Perhaps they finally understand their place in this galaxy. Sarah stopped 10 feet from the platform, her expression unreadable. The assembled representatives from dozens of star systems leaned forward in their seats. The Crystalline Collective's ambassador whispered urgent translations to her aide. The gas-breathing Nathari delegation adjusted their atmospheric suits, sensing the sudden tension that filled the room. "We come to discuss terms," Sarah said simply, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. "But first we have a gift for the esteemed Admiral Kethvar." Captain Torres stepped forward, carrying a sealed containment unit that hummed with energy fields. The container was roughly spherical, about the size of a human head, and covered in warning symbols from a dozen different civilizations. The captain's face remained stoically professional as he approached the diplomatic table where the Galactic Council's senior members sat. Admiral Kethvar's translator crackled with what might have been laughter. "Humans bearing gifts. How quaint. Your species has always been remarkably naive about the realities of galactic politics. Do you think trinkets will spare your remaining colonies from cleansing?" The Zephyrian admiral gestured to his aide, a smaller member of his species whose scales bore the scars of countless battles. "Perhaps it contains some of their primitive art, or maybe their mathematical proofs. I have heard human children are quite clever with numbers before we reduce their cities to ash." Sarah nodded to Captain Torres, who began the unlocking sequence on the containment unit. Energy fields dissipated one by one, each layer revealing something that made several alien delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. The final field dissolved and Torres lifted the lid. The chamber erupted in chaos. Inside the container, perfectly preserved in a stasis field, was a Zephyrian head. Not just any Zephyrian, but one wearing the distinctive neural crown of a fleet commander. The head belonged to Admiral Zekthor, Kethvar's own nephew and the commander of the 3rd Assault Fleet that had been terrorizing human space for months. Captain Torres lifted the head by its ceremonial crown and, with practiced efficiency, tossed it across the chamber. It landed with a wet thud on the polished table directly in front of Admiral Kethvar, rolling slightly before coming to rest with empty eyes staring up at the ceiling. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the chamber's environmental system seemed to pause. Admiral Kethvar's 4 eyes widened in what observers would later describe as the first time anyone had seen genuine shock on a Zephyrian's face. Sarah stepped forward, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "Admiral Zekthor and his entire fleet were eliminated 6 days ago at the Kepler station system. No survivors, no escape pods, no distress signals, just debris in this." She gestured casually at the severed head. "We thought you might want it back." The alien admiral's massive frame trembled with rage. His scales shifted from their natural blue-black to the deep crimson that indicated extreme emotional disturbance. When he spoke, his voice was a barely controlled roar. "Impossible. The 3rd Fleet carried enough firepower to glass a dozen worlds. Zekthor commanded over 200 vessels." "Commanded being the operative word," Sarah replied calmly. "Your nephew made the mistake of attacking human civilians. Again. We decided that pattern needed to be broken." Several delegates began rapid conversations in their native languages. The Crystalline Collective's representative was transmitting urgent reports back to her homeworld. The normally unflappable Nathari delegation had gone completely silent, their atmospheric suits hissing as their breathing patterns changed. Admiral Kethavar's aide whispered something urgent in the Zephyrian language, but the Admiral silenced him with a brutal backhand that sent the smaller alien sprawling across the floor. "You dare bring this abomination to a diplomatic gathering? You violate every treaty, every custom of civilized warfare." Sarah's smile was cold as winter on Earth's polar regions. Civilized warfare? Like bombing refugee ships? Like executing prisoners? Like targeting hospitals and schools? Her voice grew harder with each question. "Your people have spent months teaching us that there are no rules in this conflict. We learned the lesson well." The human ambassador walked closer to the table, close enough that Admiral Kethavar could see his nephew's lifeless eyes reflected in her own. "The Third Fleet was eliminated by a single human vessel. One ship, Admiral. Your nephew had 200, and we had one." The chamber erupted again, this time with urgent debates and what sounded like arguments in multiple alien languages. The mathematical impossibility of Sarah's claim was not lost on the assembled delegates. Zephyrian military doctrine was based on overwhelming force and technological superiority. A single ship defeating an entire fleet was beyond comprehension. "You lie," Admiral Kethavar snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. No single vessel could accomplish such a thing, not against Zephyrian shields and weapons. Sarah reached into her diplomatic pouch and produced a small data crystal. She placed it gently on the table next to her gruesome gift. Full sensor recordings of the engagement. Every moment, every explosion, every desperate transmission from your nephew's flagship as it burned. Feel free to review it at your leisure. The Admiral stared at the crystal as if it were a venomous snake. Around the chamber, representatives leaned forward, suddenly very interested in what the humans had to say next. "Now," Sarah said, her voice returning to the calm, measured tone of a diplomat, "shall we discuss terms?" Admiral Kethavar's massive clawed hands trembled as he inserted the data crystal into his personal viewing device. The chamber remained silent except for the soft hum of translation equipment and the nervous shuffling of alien delegates. Sarah Chen stood motionless, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that somehow managed to be both respectful and threatening. The holographic display materialized above the table, casting an eerie blue light across the assembled faces. The recording began with standard fleet formation data from the Third Fleet's final mission. 237 Zephyrian vessels arranged in their traditional attack formation, approaching what appeared to be a simple human mining station in the Kepler system. "This is impossible," Admiral Kethavar muttered, but his eyes remained fixed on the display. His nephew's voice crackled through the speakers, confident and cruel as he issued orders to begin the bombardment of civilian targets. The hologram showed the distinctive wedge-shaped hulls of Zephyrian destroyers moving into position, their weapons charging with the characteristic red glow that had become synonymous with terror across the galaxy. Then something appeared on the edge of the sensor display. A single contact, moving impossibly fast toward the center of the fleet formation. The sensor operator's voice, clearly confused, reported the approach of one human vessel. Admiral Zekthor's recorded laughter filled the chamber. "One ship?" The dead admiral's voice echoed through the speakers. "Let it come. We'll add its debris to the mining station's grave." The approaching human vessel was unlike anything in the galactic databases. It appeared roughly cylindrical, about 800 meters in length with no visible weapon ports or shield generators. Its hull seemed to absorb sensor scans rather than reflect them, giving it an almost ghostly appearance on the tactical displays. "What type of vessel is this?" demanded the Nathari delegate, his atmospheric suit speakers amplifying his synthetic voice. "Our databases show no record of such a human design." Sarah's expression remained neutral. "Prototype," she said simply. "We call it the Prometheus class." The recording continued. Admiral Zekthor ordered his fleet to open fire when the human ship closed to within weapons range. Hundreds of plasma cannons and particle beams lanced out toward the lone human vessel. The energy discharge was enough to crack a moon, concentrated into a killing field that should have vaporized any known ship design. The human vessel simply vanished. Not destroyed, not disabled, but gone. One moment it was there, absorbing enough firepower to level a continent, and the next moment the space it had occupied was empty. The Zephyrian fleet's sensors showed nothing but background radiation where their target had been. Admiral Zekthor's confusion was evident in the recording. His orders became more urgent, demanding sensor sweeps and tactical analysis. For 17 minutes, the Third Fleet searched for their mysterious opponent while maintaining their approach toward the mining station. Then the human ship reappeared, directly in the center of the Zephyrian formation. The chamber erupted in startled exclamations from multiple species. The mathematical impossibility of the ship's position was immediately apparent to every military mind present. No known technology could achieve instantaneous transportation across such distances, especially not while maintaining perfect positioning relative to a moving fleet. Impossible, Admiral Kethvar whispered, echoing the thoughts of every observer. Teleportation on this scale violates every known law of physics. We prefer the term quantum displacement, Sarah replied casually. Though I suppose the technical details are less important than the results. The recording showed what happened next with brutal clarity. The human ship began releasing what appeared to be small metallic objects, each one roughly the size of a fighter craft. These objects moved with purpose, seeking out specific targets among the Zephyrian fleet. When they made contact with enemy hulls, they simply passed through the shields as if they weren't there. Shield penetration without energy discharge, observed the crystalline collective's representative, her crystalline form resonating with harmonic frequencies that indicated deep concern. This technology supersedes all known defensive systems. Each metallic object that touched a Zephyrian ship seemed to disappear into the hull. For several minutes, nothing else happened. The Third Fleet continued their approach, Admiral Zekthor demanding answers from his technical staff about the strange projectiles. Then the first explosion occurred. The flagship of the Third Fleet's secondary battle group simply came apart. Not from external weapon fire or shield collapse, but from within. The massive vessel tore itself apart as if every internal structure had simultaneously decided to occupy the same space. The explosion was contained entirely within the hull, suggesting some form of localized reality distortion. One by one, every ship that had been touched by the mysterious objects suffered the same fate. Internal detonations that bypassed every defensive system and safety protocol. The recordings captured the growing panic in Admiral Zekthor's voice as he watched his fleet disappear around him. What did you do to them? Admiral Kethvar demanded, his voice barely controlled. What kind of weapon causes ships to destroy themselves from within? Sarah considered the question for a moment. We call them quantum mines. They exist in a state of temporal flux until they achieve hull contact. Then they synchronize with local spacetime and expand to their full size inside the target vessel. The process is quite efficient. The horror of the explanation was not lost on the assembled delegates. Weapons that could ignore shields, armor, and physical barriers represented a fundamental shift in galactic warfare. Every defense system in the galaxy had just become obsolete. The recording continued with Admiral Zekthor's increasingly desperate attempts to escape or fight back. His remaining ships tried to retreat, but the human vessel simply appeared wherever it wanted to be. The quantum displacement technology allowed it to position itself perfectly for each attack run, always striking from the optimal angle while remaining immune to return fire. The final moments were perhaps the most disturbing. Admiral Zekthor, alone on his flagship with 90% of his fleet destroyed, opened a communication channel to the human ship. The recording captured his voice, stripped of all arrogance and filled with genuine fear. What do you want? The doomed admiral pleaded. Surrender? Reparations? Name your terms. The response came in a calm, professional voice that belonged to the human ship's captain. We want you to deliver a message to your uncle. Tell Admiral Kethvar that humans are no longer targets. We are now the hunters. Any Zephyrian vessel found in human space will be eliminated without warning or negotiation. I'll carry your message, Admiral Zekthor promised. Just let me go. Let my remaining ships withdraw. The human captain's reply was delivered in the same calm tone. Negative. There are no survivors in this engagement. No witnesses except what we choose to leave behind. The recording ended with the destruction of the flagship. Admiral Zekthor's final transmission was a scream of rage and terror that echoed through the chamber long after the holographic display faded. Sarah Chen stepped forward and retrieved the data crystal from Admiral Kethvar's device. The alien admiral's 4 eyes tracked her movement with a mixture of hatred and something that might have been respect. The mining station was evacuated before your nephew arrived, she said conversationally. All civilian personnel were safely relocated. The entire engagement was conducted specifically to demonstrate new human capabilities to the galactic community. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. Now, Admiral Kethvar, would you like to discuss terms for the withdrawal of Zephyrian forces from human space? Or shall we arrange a demonstration of our technology using the Second Fleet? The Galactic Council chamber had transformed from a place of diplomatic discourse into something resembling a war tribunal. Admiral Kethvar sat motionless in his ceremonial chair, his 4 eyes fixed on the severed head of his nephew. The other delegates whispered among themselves in hushed tones, their conversations a mixture of fear, curiosity, and strategic calculation. Sarah Chen remained standing at the center of the chamber, her posture relaxed but alert. She had dealt with alien psychology for 12 years as Earth's primary diplomatic representative, and she could read the subtle signs of power shifting across species boundaries. The Zephyrians had built their empire on fear, but fear was a double-edged weapon that could cut both ways. The terms are simple, Sarah began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who held all the advantages in negotiation. All Zephyrian military forces will withdraw from human space immediately. Any colonies or outposts established in systems claimed by Earth will be abandoned within 30 standard days. Reparations will be paid for damages inflicted on civilian populations. Admiral Kethvar's massive frame shifted, his scales rippling from crimson back toward their natural blue-black coloration. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of military authority that had dominated the outer galaxy for 3 centuries. You speak as if you have already won this war, human. 1 experimental ship and a handful of exotic weapons do not constitute victory against an empire that spans 400 star systems. The crystalline collective's representative leaned forward, her faceted body catching and refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. Admiral Kethvar raises a valid point. The destruction of a single fleet, while impressive, hardly represents decisive military action against an empire of the Zephyrians' magnitude. Sarah smiled, and several delegates found the expression more unsettling than Admiral Kethvar's earlier threats. You're absolutely right. 1 ship against an empire would be foolish. That's why we didn't build just 1 ship. She gestured to Captain Torres, who produced another data crystal from his uniform pocket. This one was larger than the first, its surface covered in warning symbols that made the previously shown recording seem trivial by comparison. Would you like to see what happened to the Second Fleet? The chamber fell silent again. Admiral Kethvar's scales began shifting back toward crimson. The Second Fleet is conducting operations in the Vega sector. They reported successful completion of their mission 18 hours ago. They reported successful arrival at their target system, Sarah corrected. The mission itself was somewhat less successful than anticipated. Captain Torres inserted the new crystal into the chamber's primary display system. The holographic image that materialized showed a different star system, one with 3 habitable planets and a thriving commercial space station. The Second Fleet was indeed there, 215 Zephyrian vessels arranged in a siege formation around the station, but they were not alone. Surrounding the Second Fleet, at distances ranging from a few hundred kilometers to several light minutes away, were human ships. Not 1 or 2 vessels, but hundreds. Each ship bore the same dark, sensor-absorbing hull design as the Prometheus. They hung in space like predators circling prey, maintaining perfect formation despite their vast numbers. How many? Whispered the Nathari delegate, his atmospheric suit's respirator working overtime to compensate for what appeared to be hyperventilation. 437 operational vessels, Sarah replied, with construction facilities producing 12 more each standard day. We've been rather busy since the Zephyrians began their campaign of civilian targeting. The recording showed the moment when the Second Fleet detected the human presence. Admiral Vextar, commanding from his flagship, immediately ordered defensive formations and began charging weapon systems. His tactical displays showed human ships appearing on sensors all around his fleet, emerging from what appeared to be empty space. Impossible, Admiral Kethvar muttered again, but his voice lacked conviction. Our intelligence networks would have detected such massive construction efforts. No species can build a fleet of that magnitude without years of preparation and vast resource expenditure. Sarah's expression remained neutral. Your intelligence networks monitor traditional construction methods. Orbital shipyards, material transportation, workforce deployment. We took a different approach. The recording continued with Admiral Vextar's attempts to negotiate with the human fleet. His communications were met with silence until a single human vessel moved closer to his flagship. The ship that approached was unlike the others, larger and more heavily armed, with hull modifications that suggested command capabilities. When the human captain finally responded to Zephyrian communications, his message was brief and professional. Admiral Vextar, you are ordered to withdraw from this system immediately. Failure to comply will result in the complete destruction of your fleet. The Zephyrian admiral's recorded response was predictably arrogant. I command the second fleet of the Zephyrian Empire. We do not take orders from inferior species. Withdraw your vessels or face annihilation. What happened next defied every known principle of space warfare. The human ships simply vanished from sensors, all 437 of them disappearing simultaneously. For several minutes, the second fleet searched frantically for their opponents while maintaining defensive positions. Then the human vessels reappeared, but not where they had been before. Every human ship had materialized directly alongside a Zephyrian vessel, matching course and speed with perfect precision. The mathematical complexity of such a maneuver was staggering. Coordinating the quantum displacement of hundreds of ships to achieve simultaneous positioning represented computational capabilities that exceeded the collective processing power of the entire Galactic Council. Quantum displacement on this scale, observed the senior delegate from the Altarian Federation, his multiple limbs gesturing in patterns that indicated extreme agitation. The energy requirements alone should collapse local spacetime. How is this possible? Sarah considered the question carefully. We discovered that quantum mechanics become significantly more cooperative when you stop asking politely and start demanding compliance. The universe has rules, but those rules can be negotiated under the right circumstances. The recording showed the aftermath of the human fleet's repositioning. Each Zephyrian ship found itself paired with a human vessel at point-blank range, close enough that their shields were overlapping. At such distances, traditional space combat became impossible. Any weapon fired would damage both ships equally. Admiral Vextar's tactical situation was hopeless, but Zephyrian military doctrine demanded resistance until death. He ordered his fleet to open fire despite the proximity disadvantage. The result was catastrophic for the Zephyrians and somehow completely harmless to the humans. When Zephyrian weapons fired, they simply passed through the human ships without causing any damage. The energy beams and plasma charges continued on their trajectories until they struck other Zephyrian vessels in the formation. Within minutes, the second fleet was destroying itself while their intended targets remained untouched. Phase variance technology, Sarah explained as the chamber watched in horrified fascination. Our ships can exist in a quantum state that makes them incorporeal to directed energy weapons while maintaining normal interaction with gravity and other fundamental forces. The demonstration concluded with Admiral Vextar's flagship, badly damaged by friendly fire, attempting to ram the human command vessel in a final act of desperation. The massive Zephyrian dreadnought passed completely through its target like a ghost ship sailing through fog. The human captain's final transmission was delivered in the same calm, professional tone. Admiral Vextar, your fleet is ordered to withdraw immediately. You have 30 seconds to begin departure procedures. The recording ended with 215 Zephyrian ships limping away from the system, many of them streaming atmosphere and debris from damage inflicted by their own weapons. Sarah Chen retrieved the data crystal and faced Admiral Kethvar directly. The second fleet is currently undergoing repairs at your primary naval facility in the Rigel system. Admiral Vextar has recommended immediate peace negotiations with humanity. Would you like to discuss his recommendation? Admiral Kethvar rose from his ceremonial chair with deliberate slowness, his 8-foot frame casting a shadow across the diplomatic table, where his nephew's severed head continued to stare at the chamber's ceiling. The alien admiral's scales had shifted through multiple color patterns during the recordings, finally settling on a deep purple that indicated calculation rather than rage. You have demonstrated impressive tactical capabilities, he said, his translator rendering his words with careful precision. But warfare is more than individual battles. The Zephyrian Empire commands resources across 400 star systems. We can absorb losses that would cripple lesser civilizations. Sarah Chen nodded thoughtfully, as if she had expected this response. Resources are indeed important in prolonged warfare. Which brings us to the third demonstration. She gestured, again to Captain Torres, who produced yet another data crystal. This one was smaller than the previous recordings, but its surface was covered in biometric locks and quantum encryption seals. This recording is classified at the highest levels of galactic security protocols, Sarah explained, as Captain Torres began the unlock sequence. It concerns events that occurred in the Proxima Centauri system 14 days ago. I believe you'll find it particularly relevant to discussions of resources and logistics. The holographic display materialized to show the Proxima system's primary manufacturing complex. The massive orbital facility was one of the Zephyrian Empire's most important industrial centers, responsible for producing approximately 30% of their military hardware. Surrounding the facility were defensive platforms, patrol fleets, and enough firepower to repel any conventional assault. The industrial complex itself was a marvel of engineering, stretching across several hundred kilometers of orbital space. Mining ships constantly fed raw materials into the facility's processing centers, while completed vessels emerged from construction bays in an endless stream of military production. Our primary manufacturing hub, Admiral Kethver observed, his voice carrying a note of pride despite the circumstances. The facility produces over 200 vessels per standard month. It would require a fleet of thousands to threaten such a heavily defended installation. The recording timestamp indicated the events had occurred during the night shift, when the facility operated with minimal personnel. Suddenly, a single contact appeared on the defensive sensors, approaching from the direction of the system's asteroid field. The vessel was immediately identified as human design, matching the Prometheus-class ships from the previous recordings. The facility's commander, Admiral Tekvar, responded according to standard Zephyrian protocols. Warning shots were fired, followed by demands for identification and surrender. The human ship's response was transmitted on an open channel that reached every vessel and platform in the system. Admiral Tekvar, you are ordered to evacuate all personnel from the manufacturing facility immediately. You have 2 hours to complete evacuation procedures. The Zephyrian Admiral's recorded response was filled with the arrogance that had characterized his species for centuries. One human ship threatens the Empire's greatest industrial achievement. Your madness exceeds even our expectations. Surrender now or be destroyed. What followed was 2 hours of increasingly tense standoff. The human ship maintained its position at the edge of the defensive perimeter, making no aggressive moves but refusing all demands to withdraw. Admiral Tekvar used the time to reinforce his defenses, calling in additional patrol squadrons and charging every weapon system in the complex. When the 2-hour deadline expired, the human captain transmitted a final message. Evacuation time has concluded. All personnel remaining in the facility are considered casualties of war. Beginning demolition procedures. The chamber watched in stunned silence as the human ship began releasing objects similar to those seen in the previous recordings. However, these devices were significantly larger, each one roughly the size of a shuttlecraft. They moved with purpose toward specific points on the massive industrial complex, passing through defensive fire and energy shields without apparent effect. Quantum mines again, observed the Altarian delegate, his multiple limbs twitching with nervous energy. But on a much larger scale. Sarah nodded. We call these quantum charges. Each one contains roughly the equivalent explosive force of a small star going supernova, compressed into a quantum state that allows it to exist at the molecular level until activation. The devices made contact with the industrial complex at precisely calculated points along its structural framework. For several minutes, nothing happened. Admiral Tekvar's forces continued firing at the human ship, their weapons passing harmlessly through its phased hull. Then the first detonation occurred. The explosion was unlike anything in the galactic military databases. Instead of expanding outward from a central point, the quantum charge seemed to unravel reality itself in a perfect sphere approximately 1 kilometer in diameter. Everything within that sphere simply ceased to exist, leaving behind a perfectly smooth void in space-time. One by one, the remaining charges activated. Each detonation removed another section of the industrial complex with surgical precision, leaving behind spherical voids that intersected and overlapped until the entire facility had been systematically erased from existence. Selective reality editing, Sarah explained as the recording continued. We can remove specific targets from space-time without affecting surrounding areas. The process is quite clean, though somewhat energy-intensive. The aftermath of the demolition was perhaps more disturbing than the destruction itself. Where the massive industrial complex had existed, there was now simply empty space. No debris, no radiation, no trace that anything had ever occupied those coordinates. The defensive platforms and patrol fleets remained untouched, floating in perfect formation around a void where their primary mission had existed moments before. Admiral Tekvar's final transmission was a mixture of rage and disbelief. Impossible! You cannot simply delete matter from existence. Physics doesn't work that way. The human captain's response was delivered in the same calm, professional tone that had characterized all previous communications. Physics is a set of guidelines, not absolute laws. With sufficient understanding, most rules can be modified to suit tactical requirements. Admiral Kethvar stared at the recording as it concluded, his four eyes reflecting the chamber's lighting in patterns that suggested deep contemplation. When he spoke, his voice had lost much of its earlier arrogance. How long did it take you to develop these capabilities? Sarah considered the question carefully. Active development began approximately 6 months after your first attack on human civilian populations. We were forced to accelerate several research programs that had been proceeding at a more leisurely pace. 6 months, repeated the crystalline collective's representative, her harmonic frequencies indicating profound confusion. Most species require decades to develop significant military innovations. How did humanity achieve such rapid technological advancement? We had motivation, Sarah replied simply. And we discovered that the universe is far more cooperative when you explain the consequences of non-compliance. The Nethari delegate's atmospheric suit hissed as his breathing patterns changed. You speak as if you negotiated directly with the fundamental forces of reality. In a sense we did, Sarah acknowledged. Humans have always been skilled at finding ways around obstacles. When conventional physics proved insufficient for our needs, we simply developed unconventional physics. The universe adapted to accommodate our requirements. Admiral Kethavar's massive frame shifted again, his scales settling into a pattern that experienced xenobiologists would recognize as submission posturing. What are your terms for ending this conflict? Sarah's expression remained neutral as she outlined the human demands. Complete withdrawal of all Zephyrian forces from human space, reparations for civilian casualties and destroyed infrastructure, formal recognition of human territorial claims by the Galactic Council, and most importantly, a guarantee that no Zephyrian vessel will enter human space without explicit permission. And in return, Admiral Kethvar asked, humanity will not use quantum displacement technology to visit every Zephyrian industrial facility in the galaxy, Sarah replied. We will not demonstrate selective reality editing on your homeworld, and we will not test our latest prototype weapons on your remaining fleets. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The Zephyrian Empire, which had dominated galactic politics through superior military force, was being offered terms by a species they had considered primitive only months before. Latest prototypes? Admiral Kethvar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah smiled, and once again several delegates found the expression deeply unsettling. Did you really think quantum displacement and reality editing were the limits of human innovation? We have quite a few other projects in development. Perhaps you'd like a demonstration of our temporal manipulation research? The Admiral's scales shifted rapidly through several color patterns before settling on the deep blue that indicated complete submission. That will not be necessary. I am prepared to discuss your terms. The negotiation session that followed the demonstrations lasted for 18 hours, with breaks only for species-specific biological requirements. The Galactic Council chamber had been transformed into something resembling a courtroom, with Admiral Kethvar sitting in what amounted to the defendant's position while human representatives outlined terms that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. Sarah Chen had been joined by additional human delegates, including Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the head of Humanities Theoretical Physics Division, and General Harrison Clark, Earth's senior military strategist. Their presence suggested that the human government was treating these negotiations as a matter of species-level importance, rather than a simple territorial dispute. Admiral Kethvar had also called for reinforcements, though his options were limited by the tactical situation. The Zephyrian Diplomatic Corps sent their senior negotiator, Ambassador Veltar, whose centuries of experience in galactic politics were evident in her careful approach to the unprecedented circumstances. The proposed reparations are excessive, Ambassador Veltar stated during the 15th hour of negotiations. Her translator rendered her words with the measured precision of someone who had navigated countless diplomatic crises. The sum you demand would bankrupt the Zephyrian treasury and cripple our economy for generations. General Clark consulted his datapad before responding. Our economists calculate that the proposed reparations represent approximately 37% of the Zephyrian Empire's annual gross product. Given that your military campaigns have destroyed infrastructure worth considerably more than that amount, we consider our demands quite reasonable. The Crystalline Collective's representative had been serving as an unofficial mediator throughout the proceedings, her species' renowned neutrality, making her valuable in bridging the gap between human demands and Zephyrian capabilities. Perhaps a compromise could be reached regarding the payment schedule. Extended terms might make the reparations more manageable while still providing justice for human losses. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. We're not particularly interested in crippling the Zephyrian economy. Economic collapse tends to create political instability, which inevitably leads to renewed military conflicts. We prefer solutions that create long-term stability. Admiral Kethvar's four eyes focused on the human physicist with something approaching curiosity. You speak as if you have analyzed the sociological implications of these negotiations. Most military victors are primarily concerned with immediate gains. Most military victors don't possess the capability to eliminate entire civilizations by accident. Dr. Rodriguez replied calmly. When your weapons can edit reality itself, you become very careful about unintended consequences. We've run extensive simulations on the long-term effects of various negotiation outcomes. The implications of her statement were not lost on the assembled delegates. Humanity possessed not only overwhelming military superiority, but also the analytical capabilities to predict the sociological consequences of their actions across galactic civilization. The combination suggested a level of strategic thinking that exceeded anything previously encountered. Ambassador Veltar's scales shifted to a pattern that indicated deep concern. These simulations you mention, what outcomes did they predict for the Zephyrian Empire under various negotiation scenarios? Sarah Chen activated her portable display system, projecting a series of complex sociological charts into the chamber's airspace. The data showed population dynamics, economic trends, and political stability indices extending across multiple centuries of projected timeline. Complete annexation of Zephyrian territory would result in widespread insurgency and economic disruption affecting 37 neighboring star systems, Sarah explained, her voice taking on the tone of a university lecturer. Excessive reparations would trigger political revolution and the fracturing of your empire into competing factions, each seeking human military support to achieve dominance over their neighbors. She highlighted different sections of the projection as she continued. Our preferred scenario involves moderate reparations, territorial concessions limited to disputed systems, and the establishment of formal diplomatic relations. This outcome provides justice for human casualties while maintaining Zephyrian political stability. Admiral Kethvar stared at the projections with obvious discomfort. You have calculated the future of our entire civilization as if we were variables in a mathematical equation. In a sense you are, Dr. Rodriguez acknowledged without apology. Sociological prediction becomes quite accurate when you have sufficient computational resources and complete information. We know more about Zephyrian society than most Zephyrians do. The Nathari delegate's atmospheric suit hissed as he processed the implications. Complete information? How extensive is human intelligence gathering? General Clark consulted his datapad again before responding. We have detailed economic data from every major Zephyrian industrial center, population statistics for all inhabited systems, complete military deployment records for the past 50 years, and psychological profiles of key political and military leaders. standard intelligence gathering procedures, accelerated through quantum computing, and enhanced by our diplomatic contacts throughout the galaxy. The admission that humanity had been conducting comprehensive intelligence operations throughout Zephyrian space sent ripples of alarm through the chamber. Several delegates began urgent consultations with their own security services, suddenly concerned about what human intelligence might know about their own civilizations. Ambassador Veltar's composure finally began to crack. You speak of complete information as if you possess detailed knowledge of our internal affairs. Such intelligence gathering would require decades of infiltration and surveillance. Sarah's smile was enigmatic. Time is relative when you possess temporal manipulation technology. Gathering historical data becomes significantly easier when you can observe events as they occur, rather than relying on conventional intelligence sources. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. Humanity hadn't simply developed advanced military technology. They had apparently mastered time travel for intelligence purposes. The strategic advantages of such capability were almost impossible to calculate. Admiral Kathvar's voice was barely audible when he spoke. Temporal manipulation. You can observe our past actions directly. Among other applications, Dr. Rodriguez confirmed, though we're very careful about temporal paradox prevention. Observing the past is relatively safe, but any attempts to modify historical events could have unpredictable consequences for galactic civilization. The Altarian delegates' multiple limbs gestured in patterns that indicated extreme agitation. If humanity possesses time travel capabilities, what prevents you from simply eliminating threats before they develop? Why negotiate at all when you could prevent conflicts from occurring? General Clark's expression grew serious. Because the universe has rules about temporal manipulation, even for species that have learned to negotiate with physics. Every change to the timeline creates ripple effects that extend across multiple dimensions of probability. We've seen simulations where preventing the Zephyrian conflict results in worse outcomes for galactic civilization as a whole. He activated his own display system, showing a complex web of causality chains extending across thousands of years of projected history. In 17% of simulations where we prevent this conflict through temporal intervention, humanity becomes a galactic dictatorship within 2 centuries. In 31% of cases, advanced technology proliferates to species that use it to commit genocide on a scale that makes Zephyrian military campaigns seem trivial. The mathematical complexity of the projections was staggering. Tracking causality across multiple timelines and probability matrices required computational resources that exceeded the combined processing power of the entire Galactic Council. Sarah Chen gestured to the temporal projections surrounding them. We prefer negotiated solutions because they preserve the timeline integrity that allows galactic civilization to develop naturally. Our goal isn't to become galactic dictators. It's to ensure that all species have the opportunity to reach their potential without interference from aggressive expansionist empires. Ambassador Veltar stared at the causality projections for several minutes before responding. You're saying that you could eliminate the Zephyrian Empire from history entirely, but you choose not to because it might create worse problems in the future. Precisely, Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. With great power comes great responsibility, as our philosophers have noted. When you possess the ability to reshape reality itself, every action must be carefully considered for its long-term consequences. Admiral Kathvar's massive frame seemed to shrink as the full scope of human capabilities became apparent. What assurance do we have that humanity will not use these capabilities against us in the future? How do we know that this negotiation isn't simply a delay tactic while you prepare for our complete destruction? Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. Because our temporal projections show that the best outcomes for both species involve long-term cooperation rather than domination. The universe is vast enough for multiple limbs gestured in patterns that indicated extreme agitation. If humanity possesses time travel capabilities, what prevents you from simply eliminating threats before they develop? Why negotiate at all when you could prevent conflicts from occurring? General Clark's expression grew serious. Because the universe has rules about temporal manipulation, even for species that have learned to negotiate with physics. Every change to the timeline creates ripple effects that extend across multiple dimensions of probability. We've seen simulations where preventing the Zephyrian conflict results in worse outcomes for galactic civilization as a whole. He activated his own display system, showing a complex web of causality chains extending across thousands of years of projected history. In 17% of simulations where we prevent this conflict through temporal intervention, humanity becomes a galactic dictatorship within 2 centuries. In 31% of cases, advanced technology proliferates to species that use it to commit genocide on a scale that makes Zephyrian military campaigns seem trivial. The mathematical complexity of the projections was staggering. Tracking causality across multiple timelines and probability matrices required computational resources that exceeded the combined processing power of the entire Galactic Council. Sarah Chen gestured to the temporal projections surrounding them. We prefer negotiated solutions because they preserve the timeline integrity that allows galactic civilization to develop naturally. Our goal isn't to become galactic dictators. It's to ensure that all species have the opportunity to reach their potential without interference from aggressive expansionist empires. Ambassador. Veltar stared at the causality projections for several minutes before responding. You're saying that you could eliminate the Zephyrian Empire from history entirely, but you choose not to because it might create worse problems in the future. Precisely, Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. With great power comes great responsibility, as our philosophers have noted. When you possess the ability to reshape reality itself, every action must be carefully considered for its long-term consequences. Admiral Kethavar's massive frame seemed to shrink as the full scope of human capabilities became apparent. What assurance do we have that humanity will not use these capabilities against us in the future? How do we know that this negotiation isn't simply a delay tactic while you prepare for our complete destruction? Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. Because our temporal projections show that the best outcomes for both species involve long-term cooperation rather than domination. The universe is vast enough for multiple civilizations to thrive, provided they can learn to coexist peacefully. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. Besides, destroying the Zephyrian Empire would deprive humanity of valuable trading partners, cultural exchange opportunities, and potential allies against future threats. We prefer to think of this negotiation as the beginning of a more productive relationship between our peoples. The final phase of negotiations began when Admiral Kethavar formally acknowledged the futility of continued military resistance. His admission came during the 22nd hour of talks, after his own tactical advisors had completed their analysis of human military demonstrations and concluded that conventional warfare against such capabilities was mathematically impossible. The Zephyrian Empire accepts the proposed terms, Admiral Kethavar announced, his voice carrying the weight of defeat that would echo through galactic history. We will withdraw all military forces from human space within the specified timeframe and begin reparation payments according to the agreed schedule. The chamber erupted in a mixture of relief and apprehension from the assembled delegates. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but the implications of human technological supremacy would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. Sarah Chen nodded formally, accepting the Zephyrian surrender with diplomatic grace. We appreciate the Empire's cooperation in reaching a peaceful resolution. However, there is one additional matter that requires discussion before we conclude these proceedings. Admiral Kethavar's scales shifted to a pattern indicating wariness. Additional terms were not mentioned in the previous negotiations. Not additional terms, Sarah clarified. Additional information that affects the broader galactic community. She gestured to Dr. Rodriguez, who activated a new set of holographic displays that surrounded the chamber, with star charts showing the locations of every major civilization in the galaxy. During our research and development phase, we discovered something concerning about the current state of galactic civilization, Dr. Rodriguez began, her tone taking on the gravity of someone delivering news that would change everything. The technologies we developed to counter Zephyrian aggression revealed patterns in spacetime that indicate significant threats beyond our current conflict. The display zoomed in on various sectors of the galaxy, highlighting areas where space itself appeared to be distorted in ways that violated known physical laws. The distortions formed a rough pattern that seemed to be converging on the galactic core region where most advanced civilizations maintained their primary Territories, extragalactic intrusion signatures, the crystalline collective's representative observed, her harmonic frequencies indicating deep concern. But the scale is unprecedented. These distortions span entire star systems. General Clark stepped forward to provide tactical analysis. Our temporal scanning revealed that these distortions will reach critical mass approximately 18 months from now. When that occurs, barriers between dimensions will collapse across roughly 40% of the galaxy. The implications were staggering. Dimensional collapse events were theoretical catastrophes that could destroy not just planets or star systems, but entire regions of space-time itself. The assembled delegates began urgent consultations with their homeworld governments as the scope of the threat became apparent. Ambassador Veltar's diplomatic composure finally cracked completely. "You're saying that our entire region of the galaxy faces annihilation within 18 months, and you only mention this now?" "We mention it now because we needed to resolve the immediate military conflict before addressing the larger threat," Sarah replied calmly. "Fighting a war against extragalactic intrusion forces while simultaneously dealing with Zephyrian aggression would have been strategically inefficient." The Netheri delegate's atmospheric suit worked overtime as his species equivalent of hyperventilation began. "Extragalactic intrusion forces? These dimensional distortions are being caused by hostile entities?" Dr. Rodriguez activated another set of displays showing energy signatures and movement patterns detected at the edge of the distortion zones. The patterns suggest organized intelligence behind the dimensional manipulation. Something is systematically weakening the barriers between our reality and parallel dimensions where the laws of physics operate differently. The recorded data showed glimpses of structures that defied conventional understanding of matter and energy, geometric forms that existed in too many dimensions, energy patterns that moved backward through time, and what appeared to be entire fleets of vessels that existed only partially in normal spacetime. "We call them the architects," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "Based on our analysis, they appear to be entities that exist primarily in higher dimensional space, but can manipulate lower dimensions through focused effort. Their technology operates on principles that make our quantum manipulation look primitive by comparison." Admiral Kethvar studied the readings with the tactical mind that had made him one of the galaxy's most feared military commanders. "What is their apparent objective? Why would entities from higher dimensions concern themselves with our region of spacetime?" "Resource harvesting," General Clark answered grimly. "Our temporal projections suggest they consume entire dimensional frameworks to power their technology. What we call reality is apparently just one layer of a multi-dimensional structure they're systematically dismantling." The chamber fell silent as the delegates processed the information. Every territorial dispute, economic rivalry, and political conflict in the galaxy suddenly seemed trivial compared to the threat of dimensional annihilation. The Altarian delegate was the first to voice the question that occupied everyone's thoughts. "Can this threat be countered? Do your quantum manipulation technologies provide any defense against dimensional collapse?" Sarah's expression grew serious. "Our preliminary analysis suggests that preventing dimensional collapse will require coordinated effort from every major civilization in the galaxy. The energy requirements alone exceed what any single species could generate. Even with our advanced technology." She activated a new display showing projected energy outputs from every known industrial civilization in the galaxy. "We estimate that defending against the architects will require approximately 400% of current galactic energy production, channeled through quantum manipulation systems that don't currently exist." "In other words," Ambassador Veltar said slowly, "galactic civilization must unite and undergo massive technological advancement within 18 months, or face complete annihilation." "That's an accurate summary," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed, "which is why we've prepared a comprehensive technology sharing program for all species willing to participate in the defense effort." The delegates leaned forward with sudden interest. The prospect of gaining access to human quantum manipulation technology was almost as significant as the threat that made such sharing necessary. General Clark outlined the proposal. "We're prepared to share quantum displacement, reality editing, and temporal manipulation technologies with any civilization that commits to the collective defense effort. The technology transfer will be gradual, with safety protocols and training programs to prevent accidental reality damage." Admiral Kethvar's tactical mind immediately grasped the implications. You're offering to uplift the entire galaxy to your technological level in exchange for cooperation against the architects. We're offering the tools necessary for survival, Sarah corrected. Whether individual civilizations choose to use those tools for mutual defense or resume territorial conflicts after the crisis is resolved will be their decision. The crystalline collective's representative resonated with frequencies that indicated complex calculation. The social and political implications of such rapid technological advancement could destabilize galactic civilization as severely as the architect threat, which is why the technology transfer will include comprehensive education, programs on the responsible use of reality-altering capabilities, Dr. Rodriguez added. We've learned from our own experience that power without wisdom leads to catastrophic outcomes. The negotiations continued for another 6 hours as delegates worked out the details of humanity's unprecedented offer. When the final agreements were signed, galactic civilization had fundamentally changed. The Zephyrian Empire would withdraw from human space and contribute their military resources to collective defense. Every major species would receive access to technologies that could reshape reality itself. And all of it was happening because humanity had chosen cooperation over domination when they achieved ultimate power. As the chamber finally emptied, Admiral Kethvar approached Sarah Chen directly. Why, he asked simply. Your species could rule the galaxy absolutely. Instead, you offer to share power with civilizations that have shown you nothing but hostility. Sarah considered the question for a moment. Because ruling through fear creates enemies, but solving problems together creates allies. When the architects arrive, we'll need every ally we can find. The Admiral's scale shifted to a pattern that experienced xenobiologists would recognize as profound respect. Perhaps there is wisdom in the human approach to power after all. We certainly hope so, Sarah replied. The universe is vast and full of challenges. We prefer to face them together. 6 months later, the transformed galaxy bore little resemblance to the civilization that had existed before the human demonstrations in the Galactic Council chamber. The massive shipyards of dozens of species worked around the clock, constructing vessels that incorporated quantum manipulation technology alongside traditional designs. Former enemies now collaborated on projects that would have been impossible under the old political order. Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, humanity's newest diplomatic facility positioned at the galactic core. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, she could see the combined fleets of 17 different civilizations conducting joint training exercises. Zephyrian vessels flew in formation alongside human ships, their crews learning to coordinate quantum displacement maneuvers that required split-second timing across multiple dimensions. Admiral Kethvar, now serving as the Zephyrian representative to the Galactic Defense Council, joined Sarah at the viewport. His scales had settled into the deep blue patterns that indicated contentment, a dramatic change from the rage-filled crimson that had characterized their first meeting. The integration proceeds faster than our most optimistic projections, he observed, watching a squadron of crystalline collective ships practice phase variance techniques with their human instructors. 6 months ago, I would have considered such cooperation impossible. Sarah nodded, though her expression remained thoughtful. Shared threats have a way of clarifying priorities. When facing annihilation, old grudges seem less important than survival. The Admiral's four eyes focused on a section of space where reality itself seemed to shimmer with unnatural distortions. The architect probes had begun appearing 3 weeks ago, testing the dimensional barriers with increasing frequency and sophistication. Each probe was more advanced than the last, suggesting that the main invasion force was learning from these reconnaissance missions. Dr. Rodriguez's latest report indicates that the dimensional barriers have weakened by another 12% since last week, Admiral Kethvar noted. At this rate, we have perhaps 10 months before full dimensional collapse begins, which gives us 10 months to complete the most ambitious construction project in galactic history, Sarah replied, gesturing toward the massive structure taking shape in the distance. The dimensional anchor array stretched across several light-minutes of space, its quantum manipulation cores drawing power from the combined industrial output of every major civilization in the galaxy. The array represented the culmination of human theoretical physics combined with the manufacturing capabilities and raw materials of the entire galactic community. When complete, It would theoretically be capable of stabilizing space-time itself, preventing the dimensional collapse that would allow the architects to harvest this region of reality. Captain Torres approached from the station's command center, carrying a datapad with the latest construction reports. The Nathari delegation has completed installation of the atmospheric processing systems in Section 12. The Altarian teams finished the quantum resonance chambers in Section 7. We're actually 3 days ahead of schedule. Sarah accepted the report with satisfaction. The level of cooperation between species that had been traditional enemies was remarkable. Fear of extinction had proven to be a powerful motivator for setting aside territorial disputes and ideological differences. Any word from the long-range reconnaissance fleets? Admiral Kethvar inquired. Captain Torres consulted another section of his datapad. Fleet Commander Harrison reports successful deployment of early warning sensors at the Galactic Rim. If the main architect force begins its approach, we'll have approximately 6 weeks advance notice. The early warning system represented another breakthrough in interspecies cooperation. Human temporal manipulation technology had been combined with crystalline collective harmonic sensors and Zephyrian military logistics to create a detection network spanning the entire galaxy. Such coordination would have been impossible under the old political system, where each species guarded their technological secrets jealously. Dr. Rodriguez emerged from the station's primary research laboratory, her expression mixing excitement with concern. "We've completed analysis of the latest architect probe," she announced, carrying a containment unit similar to those used for the severed head demonstration months earlier. "The results are both encouraging and terrifying." She activated her portable display system, projecting images of the captured probe's internal structure. The device appeared to be constructed from materials that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, held together by forces that violated every known law of physics. "The good news is that architect technology operates on principles we can understand and potentially counter," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "The bad news is that this probe represents technology several orders of magnitude more advanced than anything we've previously encountered." Admiral Kethvar studied the holographic projection with his tactical mind. "How does it compare to human quantum manipulation capabilities?" "It's like comparing a stone axe to a starship," Dr. Rodriguez replied bluntly. "The architects don't just manipulate quantum mechanics, they appear to exist at a level where they can rewrite the fundamental constants of reality on demand." Sarah frowned at the implications. "Are you saying our defensive preparations may be insufficient?" "I'm saying our defensive preparations are necessary but not sufficient," Dr. Rodriguez clarified. "The dimensional anchor array will prevent large-scale reality collapse, but it won't stop individual architect vessels from operating in our space-time. We need additional countermeasures." She activated another display showing her latest research proposals. "I believe we can adapt our quantum displacement technology to create localized reality bubbles, where our physical laws take precedence over theirs. Essentially, we'd be creating pockets of protected space where conventional physics applies even in the presence of architect manipulation." The concept was ambitious even by human standards. Creating stable reality bubbles would require precise coordination of quantum manipulation systems across vast distances, with timing measured in microseconds and power requirements that strained even the galaxy's combined industrial capacity. Captain Torres consulted his datapad again. "The Crystalline Collective has volunteered to serve as coordination nodes for the reality bubble network. Their harmonic consciousness allows them to maintain quantum synchronization across galactic distances." Admiral Kethavar's scales shifted to patterns indicating deep admiration. 6 months ago, the Crystalline Collective considered humans to be primitive warmongers. Now they're volunteering to serve as the nervous system for our collective defense network. "Crisis creates strange alliances," Sarah observed. "But I prefer to think we've discovered that cooperation produces better outcomes than competition." The station's communication system activated with an urgent message from the Galactic Rim. Fleet Commander Harrison's voice carried the tension of someone delivering news that would change everything. "Harmony Station, this is Deep Space Reconnaissance Fleet 7. We have confirmed contact with the main architect force. Estimated arrival. Time at the galactic core is 8 months, 2 weeks. The fleet size exceeds our worst-case projections by a factor of 12. The observation deck fell silent as the implications became clear. Despite all their preparations, despite the unprecedented cooperation between former enemies, the approaching threat was larger than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Rodriguez was the first to respond, her scientific mind already calculating revised defensive requirements. We'll need to accelerate construction of the dimensional anchor array and begin immediate deployment of reality bubble generators throughout the core systems. Admiral Kethvar's tactical experience kicked in automatically. I'll coordinate with all military commands to begin evacuation of non-essential personnel from the likely invasion route. We need to assume that our first line of defense may not hold. Sarah Chen stared out at the massive construction project that represented the galaxy's hope for survival. 6 months ago, she had walked into a diplomatic chamber carrying the severed head of a Zephyrian admiral to demonstrate human military capabilities. Now she stood at the center of the largest cooperative effort in galactic history, watching former enemies work together to save their civilization from annihilation. Signal all construction teams, she ordered. We're moving to emergency production schedules. Signal all research teams to begin final testing of defensive systems, and signal all fleet commanders that we're no longer preparing for a possible threat. She paused, looking out at the stars that contained billions of lives depending on the success of their desperate gamble. We're preparing for war against gods. The transformation was complete. Humanity had gained ultimate power through scientific breakthrough, demonstrated their capabilities through decisive military action, and then chosen to share that power with the galaxy rather than rule through fear. Now, as the greatest threat in galactic history approached, the combined civilizations would discover whether cooperation and shared knowledge could triumph over forces that treated entire dimensions as disposable resources. The universe was about to learn what happened when humanity said no to extinction and brought their nay.